I'm Susan Euler. This program is about Cubism. Cubism originated in France between the years 1907 and 1908, and it had a tremendous impact on modern art. The effects are still being felt today, over 100 years later. Cubism was the joint invention of three artists. The first was Pablo Ruiz y Picasso. Picasso was a classically trained artist who studied at Spain's most prestigious art school. In 1904, at age 23, he moved to Paris, where he became a leading member of the avant-garde, both for his cutting-edge art as well as for his populist political beliefs. The second original Cubist was Georges Braque. Braque was French. He grew up in Le Havre on the Normandy coast, where, coincidentally, Impressionist superstar Claude Monet also lived. Braque's early work was Impressionist, but after seeing the first Fauve show at the Salon d'Automne in 1905, he changed his style and began working and exhibiting with the Fauves. Juan Gris was the third original Cubist, also Spanish. Gris was trained in graphic design as well as in painting. In 1906, he moved to Paris, where he became friends with Picasso and Braque. Originally a magazine illustrator, Gris was an extremely gifted painter whose talent rivaled that of Picasso, causing them some friction. The Cubists lived in Montmartre, a district of Paris where bohemians of all types lived. Artists, theater people, writers, political activists, and of course many ordinary working folks as well. It was also a famous entertainment district. The well-known nightclub the Moulin Rouge is located in Montmartre. Much of Montmartre was run down and shabby, which meant that rent was cheap. Picasso, Braque, and Gris, who were only in their 20s, had very little money. Therefore, a dilapidated apartment building, nicknamed Le Bateau Lavoie, was an ideal place to set up studios. The Bateau Lavoie building was originally a piano factory, but in 1889 it was divided into 20 small studio workshop apartments. These became gathering places for many artists, art dealers, and collectors such as Gertrude Stein. It proved to be a perfect place for the young Cubist to network. But it was still a dirty, ramshackle, and run-down place to live, with a constantly leaking roof, hence the name Bateau Lavoie, which means washing houseboat. More about this later. Amazingly, the Bateau Lavoie was still being used as an apartment building until 1970, when all but the bottom floor and the facade burned down. It has since been renovated and is now a museum. A real Bateau Lavoie is a large covered barge moored to the bank of a river, in this case the Seine. This barge was where washerwomen went to wash clothes for their clients, directly in the river water. Being a washerwoman, or laundress, was a very poorly paid and back-breaking job, as Picasso illustrates in this painting, The Laundress, or Woman Ironing, done in 1904. But not everyone in Paris was downtrodden. Although Montmartre was one of the poorer districts, in the first decades of the 20th century, Paris itself was prosperous, lively, and consumed with the possibilities that lay ahead in the new century, especially with modern technology, with an emphasis on the word modern. In the 19th century, only the rich could afford such things as electric lights, telephones, and motor cars. Now the middle class was prosperous enough to buy them, and buy them they did. Cubism, with its clean geometric lines, fit right in with the times. Very modern, very new, very 20th century. The first work of Cubism was Les Demoiselles d'Avignon by Pablo Picasso, painted in 1907. It depicts 5 nude women, prostitutes, from Avignon Street in Barcelona, Spain, Picasso's hometown. It's not a fully Cubist work. The 2 women on the right have faces inspired by African masks, which Picasso admired and collected. The 3 women on the left are painted in the flat, abstract style typical of Picasso's work in 1907. Like the figures on the left, African masks, as well as ancient Iberian sculpture from Spain, served as inspiration. However, the geometric faceting on the right, which merges the background with the figures in the foreground, is pure Cubism. This faceting is sometimes described as space crystals, and it does indeed look very much like rock crystals. Picasso explained that he got this idea after seeing a large retrospective show of the post-impressionist painter Paul Cézanne, who died in 1906. Comparing the background style of both artists, you can see the connection. Some of Picasso's friends, such as the Fauve artist Henri Matisse, were horrified by this work and thought Picasso must be making some sort of a joke. But Georges Braque loved it. Although considered one of the most influential styles of 20th century art, Cubism as an organized movement only lasted about 7 years, from 1908 until 1914-1915, when Europe entered World War I. There are 2 phases of Cubism. The first is Analytical Cubism. The second is Synthetic Cubism. Gris came up with the name Analytical Cubism, although he didn't always follow its rules. And yes, Picasso, Braque, and Gris did develop specific rules for how Cubism was to look. As can be seen in this portrait of Picasso painted by Gris, Analytical Cubism is characterized by a fragmentary appearance of overlapping planes, or facets, and multiple viewpoints. The facets are easy enough to see. They originated with Demoiselle d'Avignon. However, the multiple viewpoints are a bit more tricky to understand at first glance. Here's what to look for. Notice how Picasso's face seems to have several noses and misaligned eyes. That's because Gris is trying to show Picasso's face in motion, as if he were talking and moving his head. Multiple viewpoints. The idea of showing motion through abstract means was new to art, and it made a huge impression on other artists. Here, for example, is a Cubist-inspired painting of movement by Italian futurist Luigi Russolo. It's called Dynamism of the Car and depicts a fast-moving automobile. Because canvases are flat and paint is flat, the Cubists argued that artists had no reason to try to depict visual reality. In other words, to make their paintings look real. Therefore, they rejected Renaissance illusionism with its conventions of linear perspective, modeling, and a composition divided into foreground, middle ground, and background. They opted instead for a flat composition with everything located on the frontal plane. In Analytical Cubism, the background and foreground merge. In addition, since the Cubists wanted to emphasize the structure or form of their compositions, color was subdued and monochromatic, consisting mainly of grays, browns, and grayed greens. They did this so as to not distract the viewer with pretty colors, as these 2 portraits by Picasso illustrate. No bright, distracting pretty colors there, right? Gris never really followed this rule, and he continued to use color. Individuality was also questioned. For a time, Picasso and Braque refused to sign their works and strove to make their paintings look so much alike that the viewer could not tell which artist painted which work. What this was supposed to have achieved, I'm not sure. In any event, it was short-lived. In 1911, Picasso painted the words "Ma Jolie," the name of a popular song, near the bottom of this work. By adding real words to his composition, Picasso took Cubism in a new direction. That direction is known as Synthetic Cubism. Synthetic Cubism is not artificial Cubism. The name refers to a bringing together of various Cubist elements. It's an art historical term first used in the 1920s and later popularized by museum director Alfred H. Barr. But the name is not important. What's important is the style. Synthetic Cubism uses simple geometric shapes, bright colors, and has little or no depth. It also introduced an entirely new art form known as collage, in which real objects were incorporated into paintings. The artists found that by pasting newspaper clippings, fragments from commercial packaging, wallpaper, and other items from the real world onto their paintings and drawings, that they could bridge the gap between real life and the painted world of the canvas. And not all the words and wallpaper fragments seen in Cubist paintings are actually collage. Some are painted to look like collage. In this way, the artists achieved a real push-pull between what is real and what is a painted illusion. Synthetic Cubism and collage were immediately popular with artists, not just in France, but throughout Europe, and even with some artists in the artistically conservative United States. By 1912, many artists were starting their own Cubist-inspired art movements, with names such as Orphism, Futurism, Suprematism, and so on. In the United States, the American public was introduced to Cubism at the Armory Show of 1913, where Marcel Duchamp's nude descending a staircase proved scandalous to some. Well, to many. However, the work made such a lasting impression that in 2013, the U.S. Postal Service issued a stamp commemorating the 100th year anniversary of this pivotal moment in modern art. There was no turning back. Cubism had changed art forever. For the 10-Minute Professor, this is Dr. Susan Ray Euler. Thanks for tuning in. And if you want to learn more about the Armory Show, I've got a video on that as well. You'll want to look for it.